Look at your thoughts for a moment. Not what you think, but where they come from. Because most people believe they think independently. They believe their opinions are their own. Their decisions are their own. Their lifestyle is their own. But is it really? Or was it shaped long before you even started questioning anything? Think about this. From the moment you were born, you were placed into an environment. Not neutral, not empty, already structured, already filled with rules, expectations, norms, and slowly, you absorbed all of it. Not by choice, but by exposure. Now here's the key. The more something is repeated around you, the more normal it feels. And once something feels normal, you stop questioning it. That's how society works. It doesn't force you. It normalizes things. And normalization is stronger than control. Because when something is normal, you don't resist it. You follow it. Now let me ask you something. Why do people dress the way they do? Why do they follow trends? Why do they act differently in different groups? Because behavior is not just personal, it's social. You adjust without even noticing it. You speak differently depending on who you're around. You behave differently depending on where you are. You think differently depending on what's accepted. And that's the key word. Accepted. Because humans are wired to belong. And belonging comes with a cost. You have to adapt. You have to fit in. You have to align yourself with what's around you. Now think deeper. How many of your opinions are actually yours? And how many of them are just reflections of what you've heard repeatedly? Because repetition creates belief, not truth. Belief. And once you believe something, you defend it, even if you never questioned it. That's how powerful social influence is. Now here's something most people don't realize. You don't just learn behaviors. You absorb limits. You learn what's possible based on what you see. If everyone around you plays it safe, you start thinking safe. If everyone around you thinks small, you start thinking small. Not because you want to, but because it becomes your reference point. And your reference point defines your reality. Now ask yourself something honestly. Are your goals truly yours? Or are they just slightly adjusted versions of what you see around you? Because most people don't dream freely. They dream within boundaries. Boundaries they didn't create. Now let's go deeper. Society doesn't just shape what you do. It shapes what you believe you can do. And that's even more powerful. Because if you believe something is out of reach, you won't even try. You eliminate yourself before reality even has a chance to respond. Now think about that. How many opportunities have you ignored because they didn't fit into what you believed was realistic? That word again, realistic. Who defined that? You? Or everything you've been exposed to? Because what's realistic in one environment is completely different in another. But you don't see that because your environment feels absolute. It feels like truth. Now here's the dangerous part. Once society shapes your behavior long enough, you start enforcing it yourself. You judge others. You correct others. You repeat the same patterns. Not because someone told you to, but because you believe it's right. And that's how the system sustains itself. Not through control, but through people. Now let me ask you something deeper. If you grew up in a completely different environment, with different norms, different expectations, different beliefs, would you be the same person? Of course not. Which means, who you are right now is not just you. It's a product, a result of everything around you. And once you realize that, you start seeing things differently. Because now, you understand something most people never do. Your behavior is not fully yours. It's influenced, conditioned, shaped, every single day. And the question is not if society affects you. It does. The real question is, how much of it are you aware of? You don't notice it, but you are constantly being adjusted. Not forced, not controlled directly. Adjusted. Your behavior shifts based on what you see around you. And most of the time, you don't even realize it's happening. Now think about this. Why do people act differently when they are alone compared to when they are in a group? Because presence changes behavior. Observation changes behavior. Expectation changes behavior. And society is nothing but a network of constant observation and expectation. Even when nobody is watching, you feel like they are. You think about how you look, how you sound, how you come across, and that shapes your actions. Now here's the deeper layer. You don't just want to belong. You fear rejection, and fear is a powerful motivator, more powerful than logic, more powerful than truth. Because rejection feels personal. It feels like loss, and your brain will do almost anything to avoid that feeling. So what do? You adjust. You filter yourself. You remove parts of who you are to fit into what's accepted. Now ask yourself honestly, how much of your real self do you actually show? And how much do you hide to avoid judgment? Because every time you hide something, you move further away from who you actually are and closer to what society expects. That's the trade. Belonging for authenticity. And most people make that trade without even realizing it. Now let's go deeper. Because society doesn't just influence behavior, it influences perception. You start seeing things the way others see them. You start valuing what others value. You start chasing what others chase. And after a while, you forget to question it. Now think about trends. Not just in fashion, in thinking, in opinions, in goals. People suddenly want the same things, talk the same way, follow the same ideas, and it spreads fast. Why? Because humans mirror each other. It's built into you. You copy behavior to feel connected, to feel aligned, to feel accepted. But here's the problem. When everyone is copying each other, nobody is thinking independently. And when nobody is thinking independently, truth disappears. Because truth requires questioning, and questioning creates separation. Now let me ask you something. When was the last time you disagreed with something, even when everyone around you agreed? Nodding your head, out loud. Most people avoid that, because disagreement creates tension, and tension feels uncomfortable. So they stay quiet. They nod. They agree, even when they don't fully believe it. And over time, that behavior becomes automatic. Now here's where it gets dangerous. You don't just adapt your behavior. You adapt your identity. You start defining yourself based on external standards. This is what I should be. This is what I should want. This is what success looks like. But again, who decided that? You? Or the environment you've been exposed to? Because most people are not building their identity. They are inheriting it, piece by piece, without questioning it. Now think about how powerful that is. You believe you're making choices, but those choices are influenced by things you didn't even notice. That's how subtle it is. That's how deep it goes. Now here's the truth. Society doesn't need to control everyone directly. It just needs to create a pattern. And once that pattern is repeated enough, people follow it automatically. No force, no resistance, just alignment. And once you align, you become part of it. You reinforce it. You spread it. You defend it. Even if it's limiting you. Even if it's not what you truly want. And that's the real power. Not control from the outside, but control from the inside. Let me ask you something, and don't answer fast. Think about it. Right now, how many of your daily decisions are actually yours? Not what you say, not what you believe. Your real actions. The way you dress, the way you speak, the way you react, the things you post, the things you don't post. Are those choices, or are they adjustments? Because every time you enter a room, you scan it, you feel the atmosphere, you read people, and then you adjust, slightly, but consistently. Now imagine this. If you behaved exactly the same, no matter where you are, how would people react? Would they accept you, or would they look at you differently? That's the pressure, the invisible pressure, to fit, to align, to not stand out too much. Now think deeper. When was the last time you did something that didn't match expectations? Not something small, something that made people look at you differently. Most people avoid that completely, because attention feels dangerous. Judgment feels dangerous, even if nothing actually happens. That's the power of perception. You don't need real consequences. The idea of them is enough. Now let's go deeper. Because you don't just adjust behavior. You adjust ambition. You look around. You see what others are doing. And your brain sets that as the baseline. This is normal. This is realistic. This is achievable. But what if your environment is limited? What if everyone around you is thinking small, playing safe, avoiding risk, then your normal is already restricted, and you don't even notice it, because it feels real. Now ask yourself something honestly. If you were surrounded by people who think bigger, act bolder, take risks, would your mindset be different? Of course it would. So what does that tell you? That your behavior is not just yours. It's influenced constantly. Now here's the uncomfortable part. You are not just influenced by society. You are reinforcing it. Every time you follow the pattern, every time you stay silent, every time you adjust, you make it stronger. Now think about this. Why do people hesitate to speak honestly? Why do they hold back opinions? Why do they say what sounds acceptable instead of what they actually think? Because honesty can create conflict, and conflict breaks social comfort. And people are addicted to social comfort, even if it means hiding who they are. Now let me ask you something direct. How many times did you agree with something just to avoid tension? How many times did you stay quiet, even though you had something to say? That's not weakness. That's conditioning. You've learned that being accepted is more important than being real. And over time, that becomes your default. Now here's the deeper layer. You don't just fear rejection. You fear isolation. Because isolation feels like danger, even if it's not. And that fear keeps you aligned, keeps you inside the system. Now think about this. If nobody judged you, if nobody reacted, if nobody had expectations, how would you act? What would you say? What would you do differently? Because that version of you is closer to who you really are. But you don't live like that. Because society is always present, even when nobody is around. It's in your head, in your thoughts, in your decisions. Now here's the truth. You are not just living in society. Society is living in you. And until you see that, you will always think you are acting freely, even when you're not. Stop for a second and really think about this. You believe you're making your own decisions. But how often are you actually deciding? And how often are you reacting? Because most people are not living consciously. They are responding to expectations, responding to pressure, responding to what's around them. And when you live like that, you don't control your life. Your environment does. Now let me ask you something directly. Why do you act different? Depending on who you're around? Why do you change your tone, your words, your behavior? Because you're adjusting, automatically, without thinking. And that means something important. You are not as independent as you think. Now go deeper. Think about the last time you held something back. Something you wanted to say, but didn't. Why? Because you calculated the reaction. You thought about how it would be received. And then you chose the safer option. That's society shaping your behavior in real time. Not through force, through anticipation. Now here's where it gets serious. You don't just adjust your words. You adjust your personality. Over time, piece by piece, you become more acceptable, more controlled, more predictable, and less real. Now ask yourself this. Who are you when nobody is watching? And how different is that from who you are in public? Because that gap, that difference, that's where society lives. That's the space where you've been shaped. Now let's go deeper. Why do people follow trends so easily? Why do they suddenly like the same things, dress the same way, think the same way? It's not coincidence. It's alignment. Humans copy behavior. It's natural. But here's the problem. When you copy without thinking, you lose direction. You lose individuality. You lose control over your own path. And you don't even notice it happening. Now think about this. If everyone around you starts believing something, how long does it take before you start believing it too? Even if you never questioned it? That's repetition. That's exposure. That's how beliefs are formed. Not through truth. Through consistency. Now here's the dangerous part. Once you believe something, you defend it. Even if it limits you. Even if it's not yours. Now let me ask you something honestly. How many of your beliefs did you actually question? Not accept. Not inherit. Question. Most people can't answer that. Because they never stopped to think. They just absorbed. And what you absorb becomes your reality. Now here's something deeper. Society doesn't need to tell you what to do. It just needs to show you enough examples, enough repetition, enough patterns, and you will follow automatically. No resistance, no awareness, just alignment. Now ask yourself this. Are your goals really yours? Or are they influenced by what you've seen, what you've been told, what you've been surrounded by? Because most people don't choose their direction. They adopt it. And adoption feels natural. Because it's familiar. Now here's the truth. You are being shaped every single day. By what you watch. By who you listen to. By what you're surrounded by. And if you don't control that, it controls you. Now think about this. If your entire environment changed, different people, different standards, different expectations, would you still think the same? Would you still act the same? Of course not. So what does that tell you? That your behavior is not fixed. It's influenced. Constantly. Now here's the real question. Are you aware of it? Or are you just going with it? Because if you're not aware, then you're not in control. And if you're not in control, something else is. And that something is everything around you. Let me make this very clear. This is not about society out there. This is about you. Right now. Because you're not just observing it. You're inside it. And more than that, you're participating in it. Every single day. Now think about your last few days. Not what you planned. What you actually did. How much of it was truly your decision. And how much of it was just what was expected. Because expectation is powerful. It doesn't need to be spoken. You feel it. You know what's normal. You know what's acceptable. And you stay inside that line. Without even realizing it. Now let me ask you something uncomfortable. How many times did you hold yourself back? Just to avoid standing out? Not because it was wrong. Not because it wouldn't work. But because it would look different. That's not logic. That's pressure. And you respond to it automatically. Now go deeper. How many things have you not done? Simply because nobody around you is doing them? Think about that. If you've never seen it, you assume it's not realistic. If nobody talks about it, you assume it's not possible. That's how limitation spreads. Not through rules. Through absence. Now here's where it hits harder. You don't just follow society. You validate it. Every time you stay quiet. Every time you agree. Every time you go along with things. Even when something inside you says otherwise. You strengthen the system. Now ask yourself this honestly. When was the last time you did something that went completely against what's expected? Not something small. Something real. Something that made you think. This is different. Most people can't answer that. Because they don't move like that. They stay inside the boundaries. Invisible boundaries. But very real. Now here's something deeper. You've been trained to think in a certain way. To evaluate risk in a certain way. To define success in a certain way. And because of that, you reject things automatically. Not because they're wrong, but because they don't fit the pattern. Now think about how dangerous that is. You are filtering your own life. Based on standards you didn't create. Now let me ask you something directly. If you removed all external opinions, no judgment, no expectations, no pressure, what would you actually do? What would you change? What would you start? Because that version of you exists, but it's buried under layers of influence. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people never find that version, not because it's impossible, but because they never go far enough to break out of what's expected. They stay close to what's familiar. They stay close to what's accepted, and they call that life. But that's not life. That's alignment. And alignment, without awareness, is control. Now here's the real point. You don't need someone to control you when you've already adjusted yourself. That's how deep this goes. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Because now, you start noticing everything. How people act, how they adjust, how they follow, and how often you do the same. At this point, you can't say you don't see it. You felt it. You've noticed it. And now it's clear. You are not as independent as you thought. And neither is anyone else. But here's the important part. This is not about blaming society. Because society is not some external thing. It's people. It's behavior. It's patterns. And you are part of it. Which means something very simple. You can either keep following it, or start questioning it. But you can't pretend it's not there anymore. Now think about your future. Not in a vague way. In a real way. If you keep thinking the same, acting the same, responding the same, what exactly is going to change? Nothing. And that's the truth most people avoid. They expect different results, while staying the same person. in the same environment, with the same patterns. That doesn't work. It never has. Now let's go deeper. Because awareness alone is not enough. You can understand all of this and still stay exactly where you are. That happens all the time. People know, but they don't act. Why? Because awareness without action is just frustration. You see the problem, but you don't move, and that creates tension. Now here's the key. If society shapes behavior, then changing your environment changes you. That's not theory. That's reality. The people around you, the content you consume, the conversations you're part of, all of that is shaping you right now. So if nothing changes externally, nothing changes internally. Now ask yourself something directly. Are you surrounding yourself with people who think differently, who challenge you, who push you? Or are you surrounded by the same patterns that keep you comfortable? Because if it's the same patterns, you already know the outcome. Now here's the final truth. You don't break free from influence by ignoring it. You break free by becoming aware of it and then acting differently. Small changes, different decisions, different reactions, over and over again. That's how you shift direction. Not in one big moment, but in repeated choices. Now understand this clearly. You will always be influenced. That never disappears. But the difference is whether you're aware of it or controlled by it. And right now, you have that awareness. So the question is simple. Do you keep following the same patterns because they feel familiar? Or do you step outside of them, even if it feels uncomfortable? Because that's the moment where things actually change. Not when you think about it, not when you understand it, when you act on it. Now everything comes down to you, your decisions, your direction, your awareness. Because at the end of the day, your life is shaped by what you repeat. And if you repeat what everyone else is doing, you will end up where everyone else is. That's not complicated. That's predictable. So if you want something different, you already know what that means. Different thinking, different actions, different environment. And that starts with one thing. Not following automatically, but choosing consciously. Every single day. Because now, you see it. And once you see it, you don't get to ignore it anymore.